Hello, and welcome to Wholesome Monday, where we are currently deep diving into all things Nancy Drew. I hope you guys are excited to dive into chapter 7. If you remember last week, we left off with several good leads as Nancy went around and did some more investigating, and her one brick wall that she found was rewarded by at least, I don't know, what was it, 4 good leads? As usual, if you don't have time to watch the video, you can catch me on Spotify. The link will be down in the description box below. And without further ado, let's just hop right into Nancy's Mysterious Letter, Chapter 7, which is called The Wrecked Car. It already sounds exciting. "Oh, Ned, do you mean it?" Nancy exclaimed. "Will you find out if the coach's first name is Nancy?" He promised to do this and then added, "You'll be able to meet her Friday night. If she is Nancy Smith Drew, I won't tell her about the inheritance. I'll leave that for you." Ned said he would call Nancy back as soon as he found out. "I won't leave the house until you do," she told him. It was an hour before Ned called back. "I didn't learn much," he reported. "Miss Drew was suddenly called away and she won't return until just before the show." Nancy was disappointed, but knew she must be patient. After all, this was Wednesday. Friday evening was not too far away. Ned changed the subject. With laughter in his voice, he said, "Who do you think is temporary coach?" "Bert Eddleton." Nancy giggled. George Fane's date hardly seemed like the type to be coaching a Shakespearean play. He was a blonde, husky football player who was full of fun. "I can't wait," Nancy said. "Does Bert have a secret aspiration for becoming an actor after college?" Ned laughed. "I doubt it." The couple talked a few minutes longer, then said goodbye. Nancy's thoughts turned back to her visit at the Skeets home and the information she had received. Suddenly, she told herself, maybe if N. Smith Drew, the coach, is Nancy Smith Drew from England, she went to see the Wilsons where she used to work as governess. If I could only find them! Nancy went upstairs. Hannah Gruen was still hemming the dance dress. Often when the girl sleuth was puzzled, she talked over the situation with the understanding housekeeper. Now she told her of the latest report from Ned Nickerson. "I wish I knew where to find the Wilsons," Nancy said. "Have you any hunches?" "If they summer in Cape Cod, possibly they live in the Boston area," was Mrs. Gruen's first guess. "Yes," Nancy said slowly, "but lots of people from other places go there too. What would be your second choice?" "How about Springfield, Massachusetts?" After a 10-minute conversation between them, Nancy came up with an idea which Mrs. Gruen thought was very plausible. Nancy Smith Drew had been in New York studying for the stage. If the N. Smith Drew at Emerson was the same person, she had no doubt succeeded in finding a place in the theatrical world, at least as a coach. There was a good possibility that the Wilsons, for whom she went to work as a governess, lived in New York City. "I put a New York City phone book in your father's study," Mrs. Gruen told Nancy, "but I'll bet there are hundreds of people named Wilson in it." Nancy hurried off. One look at all the Wilsons in New York City would have discouraged a less determined person. She took a pencil from her father's desk and began to check likely addresses. She told herself that if the Wilsons could afford a governess, they were probably well-to-do. This meant they would live in one of the nice areas of the city. Consequently, Nancy eliminated all the business and professional addresses. Her list of likely candidates turned out to be long, but she decided to start telephoning each one. "Our phone bill will be tremendous," she told herself as call after call was made with no success. Half an hour later, Nancy heaved a sigh. Should she go on? Many things might have happened to the Wilsons she was trying to locate. They could have died or moved away. "But I mustn't give up," Nancy told herself, and began to dial another number. When a woman answered, Nancy said, "Is this Mrs. Wilson?" "Yes. I'm making a long-distance call to you to ask a question. Did you ever employ a governess named Nancy Smith Drew?" Nancy held her breath as she waited for the answer. "Who is calling?" the woman asked. "Believe it or not, my name is also Nancy Drew. By chance I heard of Nancy Smith Drew, and I'm trying to locate her. I received a letter by mistake which belongs to her." There was a pause. Then Mrs. Wilson said, "This is a great coincidence. Yes, a Miss Nancy Smith Drew worked for us a few years ago. She's a very lovely person and an excellent actress. Unfortunately, I do not know where she is right now. Once in a while she sends us a postcard or a Christmas message. As a matter of fact, it has been almost a year since her last note, in which she said she was moving but did not give her future address." Nancy was disappointed that the actress did not visit the Wilsons, but said, "I'm so thrilled to have located someone at last who knows Miss Drew. I must tell you what was in her letter. She has a large inheritance waiting for her in England." "How exciting!" Mrs. Wilson exclaimed. "I'm so glad for her." She and Nancy chatted for a few more minutes. Then the woman said, "I'm sure I'll hear from Miss Drew at Christmas time. I'll tell her to get in touch with you at once. Where can she reach you?" Nancy gave her address and telephone number and thanked Mrs. Wilson for her help. As soon as the conversation ended, Nancy went back to Hannah Gruen and told her the good news. "Now I have 2 good leads. If the coach at Emerson is not Nancy Smith Drew, then by Christmas time we should hear from the right one." Mrs. Gruen smiled. "I can see why you're a good detective," she remarked. "If you don't find hidden gold under one stone, you turn up another." The housekeeper suggested that they take time out for lunch. After eating, the two returned to Nancy's bedroom to see if the evening dress was all right. Nancy kicked off her sports shoes, removed her skirt and sweater, then stepped into the dance dress. Hannah zipped it up. Just then, the phone rang and Nancy went into her father's study to answer it. Chief McGinnis was calling. "I thought you'd be interested to hear, Nancy, that we found the beat-up car with the license number TJ12796. "You did?" Nancy exclaimed. "Where? And did you find Edgar Nixon too?" "No, unfortunately." The officer explained that the car had been abandoned and was a complete wreck. "We came across it on that road where you saw the man drive across the bridge," McGinnis added. "A little way beyond there was a sharp curve, and I guess he was going too fast and didn't make it. But he evidently wasn't hurt much because he wasn't around, and we've had no report from the hospital or any doctors about a person who needed attention." "The car really did belong to Edgar Nixon?" Nancy asked. "We don't know," McGinnis replied. "It was registered under another name with a phony address. Maybe the car was Nixon's, maybe a friend's. Or Edgar could be using aliases," Nancy thought. The chief said if he had any further report he would telephone Nancy. "We're still looking for a man who wears a camel's hair coat and hat, but we suspect that by this time he may have changed to something different." "Perhaps," said Nancy, "but if he had a beat-up car and is demanding money from his brother Ira, I'd say he isn't very well off. Men's winter overcoats are expensive, and I wonder if he could afford 2 of them." Chief McGinnis laughed. "I admire the way your mind works, Nancy. What you just said is very true," he chuckled. "I guess we'll keep on looking for a man in a camel's hair overcoat and hat." As Nancy started back to her room so that Hannah Gruen could look at the dress, the front doorbell rang. "I'll get it," Nancy called. As she walked toward the stairway, Nancy realized that in her stocking feet the dress was pretty long. Just as she reached the top step, Nancy stepped on the front of the gown. She heard a loud rip and gasped. At the same moment, she lost her balance and pitched forward. And that's the end of the chapter. And we are also back to ending each chapter with a cliffhanger. I feel like I'm getting so annoyed now because I feel like it's such a... This was also a short chapter. How many pages was this? 54 to 60? What is that? Six pages. I can count. I can do math. It's a very short chapter. Not a lot happened because it was only 6 pages. Because they had to end it on the cliffhanger, obviously. So they had to end it short. But like, also what... I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to calm down. I'm going to collect my thoughts. And then we're going to discuss this together. Rationally, cohesively, calmly, starting at the beginning. Here, Nancy calls almost every Wilson in New York City. And now that she mentions it, long distance calls used to be so expensive. When I think about it now, I don't pay for long distance within Canada. It's free and included in my phone plan. But I remember as a child, my parents needing to keep track of the time when they were talking to family members like out of range, out of province, or even within province that was further away. Because when I was a kid, even, anything outside of like 2 cities or 3 cities over was technically long distance. Anyways, what I'm getting at is I remember them having to keep track of how long they were on the phone so that the phone bill wasn't very high. So I can only imagine when she says the phone bill being so high because of the long distance charges. It's so weird to think that something like that isn't really an issue anymore. It's not really a thing. But here we go. We are again getting way more characterization of Nancy, and this time we are getting it in the form of determination. How determined Nancy is to solve these mysteries by going through the phone book. Also so funny to think of phone books because they don't exist anymore either. They did exist when I was a kid though. This book is making me feel old and it came out in freaking 1932. Thanks, Nancy Drew. But yes, so she is absolutely determined to find the Wilsons that had a governess named Nancy Smith Drew, and of course it pays off. She does find the Mrs. Wilson, and she is again rewarded for her determination. She knows that even if she doesn't find the N. Smith Drew, being Nancy Smith Drew, by Christmas time, chances are this governess will have been in contact and she will find out. So you are really getting this pattern from Nancy as a character that she does not give up. She does not let obstacles and boundaries is the wrong word, but she does not let obstacles get in her way. If she encounters a stumbling block, she will just march right on over that stumbling block to get to where she needs to go. If her dad has to pay a very high phone bill that month, then her dad is going to pay the very high phone bill because she is determined to find the Wilsons that had the governess named Nancy Smith Drew. Good thing her father is a lawyer. Now I know why her father is a lawyer, I guess, is what I should say. And then McGinnis calls her. I don't know what it's like nowadays. I do know there is a whole internet community of sleuths out there that do help and make great headway with unsolved crimes and mysteries, which I personally think is fantastic and a great skill. I guess what I'm trying to say is this reminds me of that. This is like the original version of internet sleuthing to help solve crimes and mysteries and cold cases. We nowadays have whole communities online on Reddit and other message boards and platforms going over and combing over reports, like police reports and all of that, to help solve these cold cases. And Nancy is essentially the 1930s version of that. She is in contact with the police are in contact with her to share information to help solve these things that are going on. And I feel like the privacy laws are not as strict though. The amount of people who just willingly give their phone number and address out to random strangers, honestly, is a little disconcerting to someone living in 2025. You would not do that nowadays. Maybe your phone number, but I feel like your address, you wouldn't just randomly give someone your address. Unless it's on Facebook Marketplace, I guess. We're all just deeply, deeply suspicious. And what is the world nowadays? We do find out that Edgar Nixon wrecked his car, if it even was his car. And then we get that clue drop of the aliases. This is also another great little tidbit of information that's given kind of happenstance, kind of just in passing, where Nancy comments on him maybe having aliases. As a reader, you don't really think about that the first time you read it, but that is important information that she is giving in passing. And if you're paying attention, as you, the reader, the partner of Nancy Drew, you keep that in the back of your mind. Edgar Nixon could be using aliases. And then we get to, again, what is the point of Nancy ripping her dress and losing her balance at the top of the stairs? What is the point? There is no point. The only point of this scene is to end the chapter on a cliffhanger. This irritates the hell out of me. This is such lazy writing. I hate this. If you disagree with me, holler, shout out down in the comments below, because I don't know, man. To spare you all another rant on how ineffective ending every chapter is with a cliffhanger, as I did back in, chapter 4, I will keep it short and sweet and simple, which is that this is not pertinent to anything. This is not pertinent to the plot. This is not pertinent to, Nancy as a character. This is not pertinent to whoever is at the door. This is written in solely and specifically as a tool to get you to start chapter 8. And again, back to what I was saying of where after a while it just feels like clickbait and manipulation by the writer. I really am now just getting annoyed that every chapter is ending like this, because there's so many more ways that are effective that you can use to get me to start chapter 8 that isn't just clickbaiting me into chapter 8. Especially because this now is pulling me outside of the story. This is pulling me out of the story because I know that there's no point to this specific scene. This scene only exists to make me start chapter 8. I talked about this when I was talking about character creation, where writers will sometimes start to write characters out of character because they need to hit certain beats within the story. They need to hit certain plot points. And in order to do that, they need their characters to do, A, B, and C. And sometimes there isn't a natural way to make said character do A, B, and C because it is out of character for them. And instead of actually taking the time to make A, B, and C happen naturally within the story to hit those beats, they just force the character to do something out of character. So it's very similar here, except it's doing it with the story and the plot instead of characters. The writer needs the reader, to do a very specific thing, and so they are creating a scene inorganically within the story to make that happen. And I find it is done with characters. It's very lazy writing. It is also very lazy writing within the plot and the story. And for me, as a reader who is coming at it from being more critical of the writing, or I guess breaking down more of the writing, this is not what you want to do in your story. Avoid this like you would avoid the plague. Do not do this. If you are writing a story, please do not do this. And to be helpful, let's think of some other ways that we could have ended this chapter to make us start chapter 8 that didn't land on she heard a loud rip and gasped at the same moment she lost her balance and pitched forward, ! The end. And I feel like it's such a tragedy because we just had this really smart moment from Nancy where she comments on how men's winter overcoats are expensive, and if Edgar Nixon is really demanding money from his brother and going after inheritance money, could he really afford to jackets. That's such a great observation from Nancy. And Chief McGinnis laughs and compliments her on it because it is a very good observation that he didn't think about. Credit where credit is due. And again, this is highlighting them as kind of like teammates. Chief McGinnis and Nancy Drew, they are both on the same team. They are both trying to solve the same mystery. They are both helping each other out. So you get that great scene from Nancy, and then you get this. Now, instead of Nancy tripping down the stairs, what are some other ways we could have ended it that didn't end in this? We could have literally just ended it where the doorbell rings. Who's behind the door? We don't know. We probably want to find out who's behind the door. There's no sense of urgency of who's behind the door, but I'm invested in the story now. Nancy is finding all of these leads. I feel engaged as a reader. I feel engaged even as a participant within the story. I want to solve this mystery. I'm feeling clever. Nancy is presenting us with these tells and clues, and the writer is presenting us with these tells and clues of who Edgar Nixon is and who Nancy Smith Drew is, and we're getting closer and closer to finding her. I'm excited to find her. I want to find her. I already, at this point in the story, want to start chapter 8. So why then is the writer still using these clickbaity endings to get me to turn the page when I already, as a reader, want to turn the page? And this is another thing. Perhaps because it is a children's book and I am not a child, I am an adult. But I feel like the writer doesn't trust his audience to keep turning the page, or at the very least to have that sense of excitement. The other thing when you're writing, when you're excited about your story, it comes through on the page. It comes through in your characters. Your reader feels invested when you are invested. And that's not to say that you can cut corners and be lazy and not take the time to create your characters or put in the work for, editing things, but at the same time, there is a certain level of excitement I find that most readers feel about their story, and it does in most instances come through on the page when you're reading the story. You can feel the excitement. You can feel that certain level from the characters and from the story that they are invested in that helps and makes you also want to be invested in it as well. And part of that is trusting your audience, trusting your reader that their investment in your story is going to keep them reading, is going to keep them going, is going to want them to turn the page and flip the page. So that's another thing that I find with these endings that are more clickbaity is I feel like the writer doesn't trust me as a reader, and I feel like the writer just feels like they need to manipulate me into using these gimmicks to keep me going. But really, if they just trusted me to be excited in the story, they wouldn't need to use these tactics. So really, all it had to do was, as Nancy started back to her room so that Hannah Gruen could look at the dress, the front doorbell rang. The end. That would have been enough to keep me going, because I want to find out who it is. And because I want Nancy to hit Friday. I want her to find out if the N. Smith Drew is Nancy Smith Drew. I want to meet Ned as a character. I want to see their dynamic as Nancy and Ned together in person. What are they like? What are they like solving mysteries together? I want to find out all about that. So yeah. Can I think of any other ways that we could have ended this chapter? I guess I haven't read the next chapter. Maybe I will have more to say after that. I don't really want to read ahead. Spoilers or whatever, but yeah. I would love to hear your guys' opinions and your thoughts, down in the comments. What do you think would have been a better ending for this story? How would you have ended this chapter to keep the reader turning the page to chapter 8 to continue reading? Or do you agree with me that you are also already invested as Nancy's partner and sleuth within the story to, want to keep solving this mystery. And I think that's all I have to say on that topic and that chapter. It was quite a bit shorter, but if you want to see what else I do around the internet, I have a Linktree, I have a Patreon where I read spicier stories that I cannot post on YouTube I think that's it. I'll spare you the long intro, and I will just see you guys all next week for Chapter 7. Bye! Hello, this is Endcard Alley. Big thank you to all my patrons. Your support gives me the ability to pursue my passions. If you're not sure where to go from here, you can check out one of my other videos. There should even be a suggestion on screen right now. If you want to stay up to date, you can smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. I'm also part of the Arete Media Pantheon. I highly recommend you check them out at the link. They've got something for everyone if you're looking for something new to listen to. If you're a millennial like me, you might enjoy the Goosebumps podcast. There's Broadway, there's movies, there's even Star Trek. And with that, I will see you all in the next video.